The notification chimed on Marcus Thorne's desk terminal at exactly 3:47 p.m. Cutting through the steady hum of the Immigration Processing Center, rain streaked down the reinforced windows of Tower 7, blurring the sprawling city of New Geneva into watercolor smears of gray and amber. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes and opened the encrypted message, expecting another routine deportation order instead. He found something that made his stomach clench. Priority Directive Classification, Amber Subject. Transport Authorization 7749X. Cargo, 2 to undocumented Zalani Nationals Destination. Detention Complex Kappa 9 Collection, Sector 12. Maintenance Level, 2,100 hours Handler. Officer M. Thorne. Authorization required. Marcus stared at the screen, his coffee growing cold. In his hand. Kappa 9 wasn't a detention center, it was a black site. Everyone in the department knew it, though no one spoke of it openly. People who went to Kappa 9 didn't come back. The families who asked questions afterward received form letters expressing regret for processing errors. He scrolled down to find attached surveillance photos. The first showed a woman with deep blue skin and intricate silver markings along her temples, classic Zalani features. She looked to be in her 30s, her posture rigid with barely contained fear. The second photo showed a boy, perhaps 8 years old, clinging to her side. His markings were fainter, suggesting mixed heritage, but his wide eyes held the same terror as his mother's. Rough day? Marcus looked up to find his supervisor, Deputy Director Walsh, standing beside his desk. The older man's gray suit was impeccable, as always, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Just reviewing the new assignment, Marcus replied carefully. Walsh nodded, leaning closer. Special request from upstairs. Very special. These particular refugees have been flagged for immediate processing. No delays, no paperwork complications, simple pickup and delivery. And if I have questions about the destination, then you'll remember. That questions aren't part of your job description. Walsh's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew cold. Your record shows excellent compliance, Marcus. Let's keep it that way. After Walsh left, Marcus sat alone in his cubicle, listening to the rain against the windows. Around him, other officers processed legitimate asylum cases, families seeking refuge from war, individuals fleeing persecution, real immigration work. Not this. At 8:30 p.m., Marcus made his way through the maintenance levels of Sector 12. The corridors here were narrow and poorly lit, used primarily for service access to the residential blocks above. Steam pipes hissed overhead, and the air carried the metallic temps of recycled atmosphere. He found them in a storage alcove beside a broken ventilation unit. The woman Nira, according to her files, stood protectively in front of her son. Her arms spread wide despite her obvious exhaustion. Both wore the thin gray clothing issued to processing candidates, inadequate for the cool temperature of the lower levels. "You're Thorne?" she asked, her accent thick but her standard clear. "Yes." He kept his voice gentle, noting how the boy pressed closer to his mother at the sound. "I'm here to take you somewhere safe." The lie tasted bitter in his mouth. Nira's violet eyes studied his face with unsettling intensity. Zalani were known for their ability to read emotional states, a survival trait developed over centuries of navigating complex political alliances on their homeworld. Whatever she saw in him made her shoulders tense further. "This safe place," she said slowly. "It has a name." Marcus hesitated. In that moment of silence, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. 20 years of following orders, of processing forms and moving people through the system like cargo. 20 years of telling himself he was just doing his job. But looking at this frightened woman and her child, he realized he was tired of being the kind of man who followed orders without question. "No," he said finally, "it doesn't. But I know a place that does." He turned toward the exit, then looked back. "Do you trust me?" Nira considered this for a long moment. Then, taking her son's hand, she stepped forward. "I trust that you're not taking us where you were told to take us." It was enough. The apartment above the old textile district smelled of brewing tea and safety. Two things Nira Velosh hadn't experienced together in months. She watched Marcus move quietly through the small kitchen. preparing food with the careful efficiency of someone accustomed to solitude. Her son Cale sat curled in the corner chair, finally allowing his eyes to close after 3 days of forced alertness. "The building's been in my family for generations," Marcus said softly, setting a steaming bowl before her. "My grandmother ran a seamstress shop downstairs during the old regime. No one pays attention to this district anymore." Nira accepted the food gratefully, though her attention remained split between the meal and the windows. Old habits. On Zilani Prime, survival had meant constant vigilance, reading the emotional undercurrents of every conversation, every glance. Here on Earth, that same instinct screamed warnings she couldn't yet interpret. "You're afraid I'll change my mind," Marcus observed, settling across from her with his own bowl. "Should I be?" He considered this seriously. "Probably. What I'm doing violates about 17 federal statutes. If they find us, I'll face charges for treason, human trafficking, and obstruction of justice. And yet you brought us here. Yes. Why?"
"I'm Marcus."
Was quiet for a long moment, watching steam rise from his untouched soup. "I had a daughter once. Would have been about Cale's age now." Nira felt the shift in his emotional signature, grief layered with old anger and something deeper. Regret, perhaps. She didn't press, but Marcus continued anyway. "Car accident 7 years ago. Drunk driver ran a checkpoint." His voice stayed level, but his hands tightened around the bowl. "The man who killed her was an off-world contractor. Diplomatic immunity. Never saw trial. Never faced consequences. The system protected him because protecting him was more convenient than seeking justice." Understanding dawned slowly. "So when they asked you to deliver us to Kappa-9... I saw my daughter's face looking back at me." Cale stirred in his chair, murmuring something in Zilani. Nira rose immediately, crossing to check his temperature with the back of her hand. The stress of their journey had weakened his immune system, and human pathogens affected mixed-heritage children unpredictably. "He's fevering," she said, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Marcus stood as well. "There's a medical scanner in the bathroom cabinet. Basic civilian model, but it should give us readings." As Nira tended to her son, Marcus busied himself, checking the apartment's security systems. The building was old, but he'd made modifications. Over the years, reinforced locks, privacy screens on the windows, a secondary exit through the adjoining building's roof access. Paranoia from his years in immigration enforcement, but useful now. The scanner shows elevated white cell count. Nira called from the other room. "Nothing critical, but he needs rest and proper nutrition, both of which he'll have here." She returned, carrying Cale, who had woken long enough to wrap his thin arms around her neck. Even semi-conscious, he maintained the careful silence they'd practiced during weeks of hiding. Children learned quickly when their lives depended on it. "How long can we stay?" Nira asked as she settled Cale on the small couch, pulling a blanket up to his chin. "As long as necessary." "That's not an answer." Marcus met her gaze directly. "I don't know. I've never harbored fugitives before. But I won't turn you out before it's safe, and I won't hand you over to people who see you as problems to be eliminated." Nira studied his face, reading the complex, a mix of determination and uncertainty in his emotional field. Human emotions were less nuanced than Zilani, but Marcus carried an unusual depth of feeling old wounds that had calcified into unshakable principles. "They'll realize you didn't complete the assignment," she said. "Tomorrow morning, when the transport doesn't arrive at Kappa-9, and then we become very good at not being found." That night, Nira lay awake listening to the sounds of the sleeping city. Cale's breathing had steadied, his fever breaking around midnight. Marcus had given them his bedroom while he took the couch, another small kindness in a life that had recently contained few. Through the thin wall, she heard him moving restlessly, checking locks, reviewing escape routes, making quiet calls too. Contacts she suspected he hadn't spoken to in years. Preparing for a siege that might never come, or might arrive with the dawn. For the first time since fleeing Zilani Prime, Nira allowed herself to hope. Not for permanent safety that was too much to ask, but for time. Time for Cale to grow stronger. Time to plan their next move. Time to remember what it felt like to sleep without listening for footsteps in the hall. Outside, the city hummed, its nighttime lullaby of distant traffic and settling buildings. Inside, 3 unlikely refugees found temporary sanctuary in the space between Marcus's old life and whatever came next. The missing persons report landed on Agent Cordelia Voss's desk at 0800 hours, marked with the red classification that meant someone important was paying attention. She sipped her black coffee and scanned the details with professional detachment, already formulating the search parameters that would bring this case to a swift conclusion. Subjects: Nira Valash, adult female. Zelani Kale Valash, minor male, mixed heritage handler. Officer Marcus Thorne, location unknown, last confirmed. Sector 12. Maintenance level, 2,100 hours previous status. Priority, RSOV, RYVOS had. Built her career on finding people who didn't want to be found. 15 years with internal enforcement, specializing in cases where regular law enforcement wasn't sufficient. Political dissidents, corporate whistleblowers, immigration violations that carried national security implications. She approached each case like a puzzle, finding the loose threads and pulling until the whole picture unraveled. Her first stop was Marcus Thorne's personnel file. 20 years of exemplary service, consistent performance ratings, no disciplinary actions. The profile of a reliable bureaucrat who followed orders without question, which made his current behavior an anomaly worth investigating. She pulled his financial records, communication logs, and residential history. The apartment above the textile district caught her attention. Immediately, property records showed it had been in his family for decades. Registered under his grandmother's name until her death 5 years ago. Off the grid for someone trying to disappear, but predictable for someone acting on emotion rather than training at 10:30 hours. Voss arrived at the Immigration Processing Center. The building's sterile corridors felt familiar. She'd conducted dozens of investigations here over the years. Deputy Director Walsh met her in the main lobby, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks around the edges. Agent Voss, thank you for responding so quickly. This situation is ... unusual. How so? Thorne has never shown signs of unreliability, as psychological evaluations are consistently stable. No red flags, no concerning associations. They walked toward the elevator, Bank Walsh's polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Around them, the morning shift processed the daily influx of immigration cases, legitimate asylum seekers, mixed with economic migrants and the occasional security risk that required special handling. Tell me about the assignment, Voss said, as they reached Walsh's office. Routine transport. 2 undocumented Zelani nationals flagged for immediate processing. Walsh activated the privacy screen around his desk before continuing. The order came from Director Cross personally. High priority, minimal documentation. Voss nodded. She'd worked with Helena Cross before, career administrator who understood that certain cases required flexible interpretation of standard procedures. And Thorne's response, when given the assignment? Professional. Asked a few questions about destination protocols, but nothing that raised concerns. Yet he didn't complete the transport. Subjects never arrived at the designated facility. Thorne's communications went dark at 2,115 hours, and he hasn't reported for duty. Voss made notes in her tablet, already building a timeline. Will need access to his workstation, communication records, and surveillance footage from Sector 12. Course, Agent Voss, ... double quotes. Walsh hesitated. These particular subjects were flagged for specific reasons. Their return is not just a matter of administrative efficiency, meaning Director Cross has taken a personal interest in their recovery. At 1,400 hours, Voss reviewed the surveillance footage from Sector 12's maintenance levels. Cameras showed Marcus arriving punctually, locating the subjects in a storage alcove, and engaging in brief conversation before all 3 disappeared into the building's service corridors. His body language showed tension but not panic, the behavior of someone making a difficult choice rather than acting under duress. She cross-referenced the building's exit points with external street cameras, tracking their movement through the lower city until the trail went cold near the textile district. Predictable, just as she'd suspected. By evening, Voss had assembled a complete picture of Marcus Thorne's life habits, and likely psychology. A man grieving the loss of his daughter, isolated by years of bureaucratic routine, finally reaching a breaking point when asked to participate in something that violated his personal code. Dangerous. Because people acting on principle were harder to predict than those motivated by simple self-interest. They made choices that defied logical analysis, sacrificing their own welfare for abstract concepts, like justice or mercy. But everyone had pressure points. She pulled the files on Marcus's remaining family, a sister in the agricultural sectors, an elderly uncle in a care facility, former colleagues who might harbor sympathies for his situation. The key was finding which relationship mattered enough to leverage. Her secure line chimed with an encrypted message from Director Cross. Status report required. Subjects must be recovered within 48 hours. Voss composed her reply carefully. Subject: Thorn located. Recovery operation commencing. Will advise. She hadn't actually located them yet, but she would. The textile district covered only 12 square blocks, and Marcus Thorn was a creature of habit despite his current rebellion. He'd chosen somewhere familiar, somewhere that felt safe. All she had to do was narrow the search parameters and wait. For him to make a mistake at midnight, Voss positioned surveillance teams around the textile district's primary access points. Motion sensors, communication intercepts, and plainclothes observers who could maintain watch without drawing attention. A net designed to tighten gradually until the targets had nowhere left to run. She settled in for the long hunt, knowing that, by tomorrow night, Marcus Thorn's brief career as a humanitarian would be over. The call came through on Father Benedict Crane's secure line at 0347 hours, pulling him from restless sleep in his small rectory behind St. Catherine's Church. The voice on the other end spoke in careful code, but the message was clear. 3. People needed extraction from the textile district, and they needed it before sunrise. Benedict dressed quickly in the darkness, pulling on the worn black clothing that helped him blend into shadows during his other work, the church. Hierarchy pretended not to know about. For 7 years, he'd operated an underground network that moved vulnerable people through the city's hidden pathways. Providing sanctuary for those the system had abandoned, he made his way through empty streets toward the coordinates Marcus had provided, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who'd learned to navigate between the legal and the necessary. The textile district slept fitfully around him, its narrow alleys and abandoned storefronts providing perfect cover for activities the authorities preferred to ignore. Marcus waited in the doorway of a defunct fabric shop, tension radiating from his shoulders. Beside him stood a Zalani woman holding a sleeping child. The refugees whose faces would soon be on every enforcement bulletin in the city. You're taking a significant risk, Benedict said quietly as they shook hands. Not as significant as doing nothing. He'd helped dozens of people over the years of political dissidents, corporate whistleblowers, families fleeing persecution. Most came to him desperate and broken, seeking any escape from impossible circumstances. Marcus was different. His choice had been deliberate, calculated, born from principle rather than desperation. Agent Voss has surveillance teams positioned around the district, Benedict continued. Professional watchers, the kind who don't make mistakes. Getting you out will require careful coordination. The woman near spoke for the first time. How do you know about the surveillance? Benedict smiled grimly. Because I have friends in unusual places. The network exists because good people, in bad systems, choose to look the other way when necessary. He led them through a maze of service alleys and maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the old district. The route took them beneath the primary surveillance grid, through passages that existed on no official maps. Along the way, they passed other travelers, a family of political refugees from the outer colonies, an investigative journalist whose research had become too dangerous to ignore. How many people do you move through here? Marcus asked, as they paused at a junction between tunnels. Fewer than needed. More than the authorities suspect. They emerged in the basement of an abandoned warehouse 6 blocks from Marcus's apartment. Benedict activated hidden lighting panels, revealing a space that had been converted into a temporary shelter, sleeping areas. Medical supplies, communication equipment, that operated on frequencies the government didn't monitor. You can rest here while I arrange the next phase, Benedict said. But understand, once you enter the network, you can't go back. The life you knew is over. Marcus nodded without hesitation. Nira held her son closer, whispering reassurance in Zelani as the boy stirred in her arms. Where will we go? She asked. There's a settlement in the Northern Territories. Off-grid community that asks few questions about people's past. They need skilled workers, and they understand the value of discretion. Benedict activated a secure communication terminal and began sending coded messages to contacts along the route. Safe houses, transportation, documentation that would give them new identities. The network operated on trust and shared purpose, maintained by people who understood that sometimes the law and justice pointed in opposite directions. Agent Voss will trace our movements eventually, Marcus said, watching Benedict work. Eventually. But by then, you'll be beyond her reach. Benedict paused in his typing. Are you certain about this choice? Once we begin the extraction, there's no returning to your old life. My old life involved following orders that sent children to black sites, I'm certain. As dawn approached, Benedict made final preparations for their departure. A cargo transport would arrive at 0600, carrying legitimate freight and 3 additional passengers who officially didn't exist. The driver was a network volunteer who'd been moving refugees for years, her truck modified with hidden compartments that could pass casual inspection. The journey will take for days, Benedict explained. You'll travel with false documentation, but if stopped, let Mara handle the talking. She has connections with border authorities who understand our work. Nira touched his arm. Why do you do this? Benedict considered the question. Because I believe in sanctuary. True sanctuary, not the conditional mercy that governments offer. Everyone deserves a chance to build a life free from persecution. 555, the transport arrived on schedule. Mara emerged from the driver's compartment, a weathered woman in her 50s whose calm demeanor suggested she'd faced danger before and survived through preparation rather than luck. 3 passengers. To the northern route, Benedict said formally. Welcome aboard, Mara replied, activating the hidden compartments behind the truck's legitimate cargo. As Marcus and Nira prepared to leave, Benedict handed Marcus a small communication device. One-time use only. If you reach the settlement safely, send word. It helps the network know which routes remain secure. They shook hands one final time. Then Marcus, Nira, and Kale disappeared into the hidden spaces of Mara's truck, beginning the next phase of their journey toward freedom. Benedict watched the transport disappear into morning traffic, then began the careful process of erasing any trace of their presence. By evening, Agent Voss would find only empty rooms and cold trails, another case that had slipped through the system's fingers. He returned to St. Catherine's as the sun rose. Ready to resume his official duties while keeping the unofficial, new, running beneath the surface of legitimate society. Somewhere in the city, other people would need sanctuary before the day was over. The work continued, as it always had, as it always would. The emergency briefing convened in Director Helena Cross's private office at 0730 hours. The city's morning light filtering through reinforced windows that had witnessed 2 decades of difficult decisions. Around the conference table sat the department's Senior Staff Deputy Director Walsh, Agent Voss, and 3 section chiefs whose jurisdictions had been compromised by Marcus Thorne's unauthorized actions. Helena reviewed the overnight reports with practiced efficiency, her expression revealing nothing of the calculations running behind her steel-gray eyes. 23 years of immigration enforcement had taught her to compartmentalize emotions, focusing on systemic outcomes rather than individual cases. But this situation threatened to unravel policies she'd spent years implementing. Status report, she said without preamble. Agent Voss consulted her tablet. Subjects Thorne, Valash, and the child have disappeared from the textile district. Surveillance teams report no movement through established exit points. They've either gone underground or found assistance. The underground network, Walsh added grimly. Father Benedict Crane's operation has been suspected but never proven if they've made contact. Then our window for recovery is closing rapidly. Helena stood, moving to the wall display that showed the city's administrative districts. Red markers indicated confirmed sightings. Yellow showed potential safe houses. Green marked the expanding search perimeter. What about Thorne's motivations? Has psychoanalysis provided insights? Dr. Sarah Kim, the department's behavioral specialist, leaned forward. Profile suggests emotional breakdown triggered by personal trauma. The loss of his daughter creates psychological parallels with the refugee subjects, acting on grief, rather than ideology, making him unpredictable. Yes, ma'am. Subjects motivated by emotion often make choices that defy strategic analysis. Helena nodded, filing the assessment with dozens of others she'd accumulated over the years. Understanding people's motivations was essential to predicting their actions. But prediction became complicated when those actions violated established patterns. She activated the secure terminal at her desk, pulling up the classified files that had initiated this crisis. The Zelani refugees weren't random immigration violations. They carried information about corporate mining operations on their homeworld, data that certain interests preferred to keep confidential. Their arrival on Earth had triggered a complex web of political and economic calculations. Agent Voss expanded the search parameters to include the Northern Territories. Cross-reference transport manifests, communication intercepts, anything suggesting movement toward off-grid settlements. That's a significant resource commitment, Director. The alternative is explaining to Senator Morrison why 2 key witnesses in his mining investigation have vanished from federal custody. The briefing concluded with task assignments and operational timelines. As her staff dispersed to implement the expanded search, Helena remained at her desk, studying the personal files of the 3 fugitives. Marcus Thorne's service record showed exemplary compliance until his daughter's death, a single traumatic event that had apparently transformed a reliable bureaucrat into a humanitarian rebel. Her secure line chimed with an encrypted message. From the senator's office, situation containment. Essential subjects must not reach media or congressional committees. Helena composed her reply carefully. Recovery operations proceeding. Full resources committed at 1200 hours. She received word that surveillance teams had identified Father Benedict Crane entering St. Catherine's Church after an unexplained absence during the night. The correlation was suggestive but not conclusive. The priest's activities remained within plausible bounds of legitimate ministry. Helena made a decision that violated several departmental protocols. She authorized a surveillance team to monitor Crane's communications and movements, operation that required warrants the department didn't technically possess. Sometimes effective enforcement required creative interpretation of legal boundaries. By afternoon, the search had expanded to cover 300 square kilometers of northern territories. Satellite surveillance, ground teams, communication, intercepts that caught fragments of coded conversations. The fugitives were moving through a sophisticated network that had been operating beneath official notice for years. At 1800 hours, Agent Voss reported a breakthrough. Communication intercept. Suggests the subjects are traveling by commercial transport. False documentation provided by network associates. We have 3 possible routes to off-grid settlements. Deploy teams to all 3 routes. Director, that level of resource commitment will require justification to the Oversight Committee. Helena met Voss's gaze directly. Then we'd better recover the subjects before justification becomes necessary. That evening, Helena remained in her office long after her staff had departed. The city's lights stretched endlessly beyond her windows, each representing thousands of people living within the systems she'd spent her career maintaining. Immigration enforcement wasn't glamorous work, but it provided structure, predictability, the framework that kept society functioning according to established rules. But Marcus Thorne's choice had reminded her of something she'd tried to forget. That rules occasionally conflicted with justice, and people like Father Benedict Crane existed to bridge that gap. The underground network operated in spaces where official policy failed, providing alternatives for situations the system couldn't address. Her secure terminal chimed with an urgent message. Subjects identified at Northern Checkpoint. Recovery Team dispatched. Helena stared at the screen. Knowing that within hours, Marcus Thorne would be in federal custody, Nira and Kale Valash would disappear into the detention system. The mining information that had started this crisis would remain safely buried. She thought about her own daughter, grown now, but still calling every Sunday to check on her mother's well-being. What would that daughter think if she knew how many other children had vanished into facilities like Capenine? Helena's finger hovered. Over the keyboard, cursor blinking in the message field, she could send orders to delay the recovery team, create administrative complications that would give the fugitives time to reach sanctuary. It would end her career, but it might preserve something more valuable than professional advancement. Instead, she typed, "Maintain pursuit. Recovery authorization confirmed." Some choices were too large for individual conscience to overcome. The system would continue, as it always had, protecting some by sacrificing others. Helena Cross would remain its faithful servant, carrying the weight of necessary decisions until someone stronger found the courage she lacked. Outside, the city hummed with the quiet desperation of people seeking safety in a world that offered none without price.